I guess I'm going to start by asking you the same question that I always ask all of my guests. And just for people who may be unfamiliar with my channel or the conversations that I've had, I'll explain a little bit about what it means. So, the thing that I ask everyone when they first come on is, what is your evolution of race consciousness? And what I mean by that is, when did you first become aware of people being divided up into different racial categories and that those racial categories have meaning ascribed to them? And somehow you became aware of that. I'd love to know what your evolution of race consciousness is and how did it change over time, if at all?
Yeah, that's such a great question to start out with. So, for my story, I am Korean American. I was adopted by a white family when I was about 6 months old. So, as an infant, I came here to America. We lived in New York. I grew up in New York on Long Island, not too far out of New York City. Um, and so for me, race is, I don't want to say unique because there's a lot of us out there. There's a lot of Korean American or internationally adopted, interracially adopted children. And so we have this kind of unique story for ourselves in that we grow up with this sense that something is different, but we don't know what. We just, for me personally, I always knew I was different from my family, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it at an early age. And I'm not sure this is the first time it happened, but it certainly was a time early on. I was probably five, I would say, because I think I had already started school. And someone had asked me, one of my classmates, so another 5-year old, asked me where my real parents were. And in that moment, I thought, well, I don't know. And what do you mean by that? Those are my real parents. Like, it just really threw me off. Like, I always knew I was adopted, but like that language was always there, but it hadn't really sunk in what that meant. And so for me, my race and my birth story, my story of origin was always tied up together. Um, and so as a young child, just having questions like that from other kids, like, you don't look like your mom and dad, or, where's your real mom and dad? Or do you think in Korean? I remember someone asking me that as a young kid. And I was like, of course not. I think in English, like anybody else, right? And so those are all questions that I got as a young child, that made me kind of realize there's something different about my experience. Um, that said, I was in New York. I was on Long Island in the suburb of Long Island in Nassau County, if that means anything to anyone. But for me, I didn't have a lot of Asian Americans around. The neighborhood I grew up in, there were not a lot of non-white people in my neighborhood, my community growing up. There are a handful, and honestly, a few of the other Asian American people I knew were also all adopted. So that was my experience in my neighborhood. But I did have, I guess, good fortune. I mean, I believe nothing, everything happens for a reason, but I was able to start attending a Korean church there in New York because there was a market nearby that was owned by a Korean family. And they saw me and they saw my parents and they invited us to come to their church. And at that church, they had a night that was, and I think back on this now. So it was like late 70s, right? So like maybe 78, 79, 1979. And I'm kind of old, but not that old. Anyway, so this is late 70s, early 80s, and this church in New York was having these Korean culture nights where they would introduce people to the Korean culture, and they would have food and dancing and music and all things of Korean culture. And it was specifically for adoptees, which I look back on it now, like how unique that was and how privileged I was to go to those, as a young kid and experience that. Um, and then but those stopped, and I've never known why, like they stopped doing that
I would guess
after a
it's
few years.
because typically those things stop because the person who's doing it stops. Like
Yeah. Oh
someone
yeah.
made that happen. So,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, who knows how that person moved or whatever, right? But yeah, but we did end up going to that church for a few years, many years, like 10 years. Um, and that was my only real connection to other Korean people growing up, which was great. But it did put me in this kind of strange place in terms of race consciousness because, and here's where my story gets starts getting complicated, as an adoptee, particularly in some faith communities, you're given this kind of mixed message about your ethnicity. Like you're given this kind of, you hear it called a white savior complex. Like, these nice white families adopting these poor, third world country children that are poor, or have a fate worse than death, and like these kinds of messages that are put out there about international adoptions that we still hear today. And it's kind of getting a second wind now, which we can talk about. But this kind of idea that these children like me who were given up for adoption for any number of reasons, and these nice suburban middle class white Christian families are the answer for our dire straits. Like I needed to be saved, and so I was brought into this family, and then that gets conflated with my faith and what I believe about God, and that God saved me. And then you think about, well, what did he save me from? And that starts to what starts to come out of that is a white supremacist attitude towards global people, towards the rest of the world.
Hmm.
Because what comes out is, if you had stayed in Korea, you would not have been you wouldn't be as well off as you are here. And not just socioeconomically, we're talking on multiple levels, like religion, the Christian supremacist attitude, like you had to become a Christian instead of some other religion, or you had to have this certain way of life that you have here in America, right? And I mean, there's just lots of those messages that you start getting as a kid growing up, that you needed a savior, and this nice white family was the one to do it. um, and so I became more and more aware of that as I got older, of course. Often being the only Asian American in any given room, often being the only non-white person in any room. But that's how I grew up. And feeling this pressure to not be that interested in my own birth ethnicity, or if I wanted to learn about Korean culture, that was okay, but it was with this kind of sense that it was really less than, somehow it was less than what my family offered me. um and some of that came directly from my upbringing. Some of it came indirectly, more from the culture surrounding us, whether it was from church or from, I grew up going part of the time to a Christian school and then part of the time to a public school. And to be honest, I got that message from both, like from both Christians and non-Christians, just this kind of sense of, being Korean was weird. I mean, I still remember in high school, someone just thinking Korean music was weird, or just having that kind of sense of it was so other and so far removed from their experiences.
Thanks for watching. For access to the full-length conversation and all of the 2-hour-long unedited conversations that I've had on race, click the support link in the description below. Thanks for your support and see you next time.